Yeah, definitely.
It's getting kind of busy. Yeah. No, it's good. I know Meyer, I think, is away this Shabbat, but he's sending his regards.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I guess we'll get started. It's
Perfect.
it's what, 10 o'clock. Okay, so this evening we're going to talk about what's bugging us. Literally, we're going to talk about bugs.
Ooh.
Okay. Okay. Sorry for the pun, but I had to throw that in there. Okay. I was gonna sort of combine it with some other things, but I wanted us to take our time with this, and then as we get on and go through the halachot and talk about it, then we'll sort of segue into trying to compare two popular, I guess, eating lifestyles. One in the Mediterranean diet, Mediterranean lifestyle of eating, and one with a whole foods plant based eating, and see what's better, the pros, the cons, and that type of thing. And I'll leave it up to your wisdom, respect all of your wisdom to decide what's what right and what you can pick out what's good from all of them, and implement those in your lives. So to start off with, the Torah tells us that we are not permitted to eat bugs, tolaim. And in fact, there are almost in 5 places the Torah tells us that. In the book of Leviticus, 3 times it says in Vayikra, in chapter 11, all of the invertebrates that swarm on the ground are detestable things; they shall not be eaten. Furthermore, in the same chapter, it says all four-legged flying insects are detestable things for you. And again, also in the same chapter, it says anything in the seas and rivers which does not have fins or scales, including all invertebrates and including all living things which are in the water, are detestable things for you. So we see that we have, this overarching prohibition in the Torah in numerous places that we're against consuming insects, even very tiny ones, as long as they are visible to the naked eye. Okay, and so the Torah mentions it, and it seems very strict. Now, in recent years, also due to federal regulations that restrict insecticide spraying and genetic changes, that also has caused some insects to become more resistant to the insecticides, and you find them in increasing amounts of insects such as thrips and aphids. Those are the primary ones that you find in vegetables, especially green and leafy vegetables. Although they're quite small, they actually are visible to the naked eye, and they also have to be removed. So, just to give you a sort of an estimate here, aphids range in size from 2 to 5 millimeters, so about 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. We're talking about here. Okay. So that bowl of salad that you just ordered, at a restaurant that may or may not be kosher, and which may look kosher, could actually have more non-kosher ingredients, the bugs, and more prohibitions around it than a cheeseburger at a local fast food restaurant. Not that you should have either of them, but that is like the general, perspective I want you to have when it comes to the prohibition of consuming bugs. Okay, so the Gemara tells us in Tractate Bava Metzia on page 61b that the school of Rabbi Ishmael taught, Hashem said, had I only brought the Jewish people up from Egypt only in order that they not defile themselves with insects, it would have been enough. Okay, that's the statement from the Talmud. God consciousness and holiness are associated with avoiding the consumption of insects and worms. Okay, so there's something that's I think that's the message that comes across, especially when it's elaborated on in the Talmud. So getting technical, the Torah describes 3 types of invertebrates and repeats the prohibitions against eating these 3 types many times. And the number of repetitions of each prohibition is related to the harm that it causes the soul. Okay, so for example, when it talks about water creatures such as leeches, for example, it's repeated 4 times in the Torah. When it talks about land creatures such as ants and worms, it's repeated 5 times in the Torah. When it talks about flying creatures such as flies and mosquitoes, that's repeated 6 times in the Torah. Okay, so there are 6 prohibitions associated, or 5 or 4, depending on which insect we're talking about here, on which food. Okay, so it's important to know a couple of things. Only insects which arise independently and then infest produce which is picked but still good, or which is still growing, that's what really is prohibited. Okay? Insects which develop as produce spoils, such as in rotten fruit or putrefying meat, for example, as weird as it sounds, it actually is permitted for consumption, believe it or not. So I mean, like, I know that sounds really that sounds really weird, but if we're going to the actual prohibition in the Torah has to do with, that which comes out or arises independently and is not related to the the spoilage type of thing as a result of the spoilage. I think that's really the point there. Not that I would recommend having spoiled produce or anything like that or rotten fruit. Okay, although I understand that when they make jam, it is made with rotten fruit. I understand. So, or for the most part, is that not like it's not necessarily the freshest thing in the world?
Just really ripe, but not like rotten, because
Okay.
because you preserve it, like you
Okay.
can it, right? I think if it was like moldy, that it would be.
Yeah, that would be a problem.
Ew.
I could see that. Okay. Now, there's a question when it comes to a concept called bitul or nullification. So usually something that is as small as an insect would be what's called batel. That means it would be nullified in a large volume of permissible food. Okay. Now, that's under normal circumstances, but the truth is that insects are different. The halakha tells us that a complete creature cannot be nullified. So, for example, the worm on the bottom of a tequila bottle does not become nullified by all the liquid in the tequila bottle, okay? Because it is a whole organism, it's a whole creation, okay? But if you cooked up a soup and found a fly floating in it later, the fly should be removed and the soup will now be permissible. Okay? All right. Okay, so now 3 or more insects in the food,
We'll never hear.
That qualifies for what's called infestation. So it has to be sifted out, it has to be strained, etc. Okay. Now also insect parts also must be removed
Oh, I think
whenever
it's upstairs,
possible.
isn't it?
I know that
Did you hang it yesterday or something last night?
somebody's speaker his phone is on. All right. So the FDA has a maximum government, for example, in the States, the FDA has a maximum government allowance or tolerance for insects in foods. And we're often not even aware of what we are eating. I know, like they talked about it in cereal, for example, finding a certain amount, allowing a certain amount of mouse droppings or things like that, or whatever the case is. Yeah, I know.
No,
But
they're not. No, they're not.
I think of when my brother. I have one brother, and now he lives in South Bend, Indiana, but he lived in Israel for about 10 years. And when I went to visit him, I'd open his fridge or his freezer, and he'd have like all his food would be there. Like he had like nothing in the pantry. Why is everything in the fridge and freezer? And he said that like everything gets infested because of the heat.
Wait a minute.
Like everything. So
Mouse droppings.
like
That's nonsense.
bags of rice, wheat, flour, everything basically gets stored in cold storage or in a fridge, so that to avoid infestation as much as possible.
Crazy. I mean, he was just joking, maybe, but what does that mean? That's absolutely ridiculous.
Can we have someone close their speaker? I think. Okay. Okay, so what do we have to do here? The solution here is that we have to study the characteristics of each type of produce very carefully. Different seasons may have different requirements in different countries, but now as a global village, it really doesn't matter. Different types of produce also have different types of requirements. So strawberries are treated a little differently from romaine lettuce and how they're handled and washed in halakhic terms. And you'd be surprised that you can easily YouTube bugs in strawberries, and they look exactly like the outside of the strawberry. When you see them moving around, it's almost shocking how they look exactly the same. And it's probably easier to find to view the little bugs or aphids or thrips on lettuce than it would be on strawberries. And we have had, even here in Toronto with the COR, there have been sort of periods or seasons where strawberries are declared infested because they're found in every single package practically, and so there's this blanket prohibition goes across not to allow strawberries for a little while because just everything comes infested type of thing. So the truth is, knowing in the Jewish home, whether it's a mashgiach or in the Jewish home, having a knowledge in order to verify precisely how and when to check each type of food is really important. And there are a lot of guidelines. Even in a shul, in the kitchen, there should be guidelines that are set out as to how vegetables are checked and how they're washed, and there always has to be sort of that constant, continuing education aspect to being on top of that. Okay. When it comes to checking vegetables in general, there is sort of a minimum amount of equipment that's required. Clear bowls or white plastic bowls of various sizes, depending on the size of the produce that's being checked. Regular dishwashing soap or a vegetable wash soap you can get at a health food store. A fluorescent light, so you have a good view of the vegetable. Some people use a jeweler's loupe or even a magnifying glass, so you can really get a good look at assisting the naked eye, so to speak, of what you're seeing, on the leaf or on the vegetable. Okay. One thing that came up as a really interesting, hold on, as a really interesting thought was recently in a lot of publications there have been sort of addressing the issue related to about bugs, and so, and again, it does come with it is warranted that you see a lot more publications, but it's interesting if you look at some of those really well-known or fancy like Jewish magazines that you might find, in like Mishpacha or Ami or things like that. You'll see all these like ads for like these produce growers that are falling over themselves to provide every single possible, green vegetable with like all the best kosher certifications, all the methods that they use to make sure that there are no bugs in it. You'll find like greenhouse grown, triple washed, insect free, requires no checking. All the it's a really big thing. It's a big business also, but it's a very big thing. And so, everything is done to guarantee, that you are, and it's done with, hopefully also, they're providing a tremendous public service, but the question bears to mind, if nowadays we use all this innovation and technology to ensure that there really are no bugs, lurking in our lettuce, then what did previous generations do? It's a valid question, and they didn't know, or actually could not have known about, or could they have known about the proper methods of checking, or all these uninvited guests that we have in our food sometimes. So it's not just an academic question; it's really more like it's a question that begs for us to find sort of an answer to it. And hold on, and so, from a halachic standpoint, we have to sort of understand what was happening in previous generation. So we're not going to sort of denigrate our ancestors to think that they didn't know what they were doing, or they relied on more lenient opinions, for example, or when it came to worms. And there are different aspects of halakha when it comes to insects in food. So, for example, sometimes there are specks on the peel of a citrus fruit, and there is a debate in halakha whether one has to assume that they are actually insects or not. Okay, there are also other leniencies. There's one leniency that for example, that perhaps an insect that is born inside a food item does not maintain the full halachic status of a bug. Okay, and it might be considered nullified. So. And then for sure that virtually every authority in halakha states that anything that cannot be seen by the naked eye, okay, is not considered present. Okay, so with that, we can sort of understand how previous generations sort of dealt with these prohibitions that seem to be even worse than eating a cheeseburger, for example. Okay, and there are many great authorities and halakha throughout generations that worked really to find, justification to allow us to eat many foods. In those days, especially in the summer, like I said, many foods like wheat and grain, they were extremely prone to insect infestation, and of course there was very few options for storage in previous generations. No refrigeration, perhaps, or things like that. I know in days of old, I even have, there was in one of the bakeries where I worked, there's an Italian baker who works in the kosher bakery there. He was telling me that his grandparents, when they wanted to store something, they put it like in a sackcloth and dig it in the ground to keep it more, cooler type of thing as a storage. Even like a starter yeast, they would put it, wrap it up in cloth and put it in the ground. And that's how, they would keep it and use it type of thing. So it does show that, it demonstrates the fact that refrigeration is an amazing technology innovation we have in our generation, in our day and age. So there were a lot of recommendations or ideas that were given to lessen the odds of eating bugs. And I'm going to quote something that was really nice here. It says here, a lot of these halakha authorities wrote, to find merit for the children of Israel, and that they won't stumble on such a great sin, as it's a near impossibility to find any food, especially in the summer days, that has no trace of any sort of insect, and it is almost impossible to properly check. Rav Moshe Feinstein, one of the later authorities of halakha from our generation, from the last generation, he was asked near the end of his life about not allowing or prohibiting a certain type of fruit because of a possible insect issue. And he responded that it may not be publicized that the fruit is prohibited. He said, "There's no way. No, you're not allowed to say it's not allowed." That's pretty much what he said. And aside from the fact that there were lenient opinions about this particular case, he writes, "It's prohibited to spread rumors about earlier generations who could not have possibly been stringent on these issues as they were unaware of them." He writes. Okay, yeah. So basically, it says here that the main thrust of what Feinstein was saying was that people from earlier generations were not culpable, even though they may have been eating, instances of things that were not kosher, like bugs, for example. Rather it was that even if it is assumed that the halakha generally follows the more strict opinion, we may not publicize that certain issues are prohibited. And he was teaching us, but Moshe Feinstein, that it is preferable to rely on the lenient opinion than to say that something is definitely prohibited and cast negative aspersions on previous generations, whom without any doubt were on a higher spiritual level than we are, especially since they are sort of one step closer to Mount Sinai. There's this overarching idea that the closer the generation is to the revelation of the Torah, the holier they were, and the farther we are, the less holy we are, so to speak, or the less connected to, on a spiritual level we are, and that type of thing. Okay. It's important also that there are also many opinions that disagree with leniencies, and they don't rely even on any sort of leniencies, and are very strict with bugs, and that's pretty much it. But I think Rav Moshe Feinstein was very much like in the mainstream in saying, we're not going to disparage previous generations by saying that this fruit is prohibited, only because now we may be able to see something more that previous generations did not see, so to speak. Okay, so I think that sort of answers on a certain level the idea behind how is it the previous generations didn't have all these technologies or innovations, and they were eating stuff and now we don't eat it, type of thing. So I think each generation has its what it deals with, and the fact that we're given these resources in our generation, I guess, maybe gives us a chance to improve ourselves, to better ourselves, to get the opportunity to be more spiritually connected, so to speak, and to eat clean, so to speak, on a spiritual level as well as a health level. And so, any questions on that? I mean, that's pretty much true about bugs. I think I'll try to sort of send, if I can, after the Shabbaton, maybe some pictures and stuff like that. I'll share with you about what these sort of bugs look like. The COR is a great resource goes through has whole lists of vegetables and fruits and this and that, how to check them, where to check them, the infestation risk, the percentage of infestation that's possible, and then how to go through them and with different methods. Really worth it. Also, the CRC out of Chicago has some really good videos. I think on YouTube you can find them. A lot of the kosher agencies like Star K and OU also have some great videos about how to check vegetables. If you want to go through that, I highly recommend it as one of the things you do. It's interesting. We think we can sort of like we buy some lettuce, we can pull it off the shelf and just throw it onto our plate. And it always reminds me, like, I think we, again, having that mindfulness and that God consciousness, we're always reminded there's always one more step we have to do, to recognize that, that anything that comes into our bodies, through anything we consume, we have to be sort of careful, just like anything we consume spiritually, anything we hear, anything we see, anything we eat, we want to be careful, of what we're putting into ourselves, because, what we put in is sort of what we get out, so to speak.
Rabbi.
Okay. Yes, Grace.
Is there a vegetable that we really shouldn't eat because it's very difficult to clean it?
Yes, that's a very good question. So there are some, high risk vegetables. For example, broccoli is a big one. Okay. Broccoli is really, really difficult to clean. I remember sitting, I was probably around Pesach time, sitting, and I had probably washed broccoli 3 or 4 times and still seen infestation, still seeing bugs. And by that time, I was like, no, we gotta throw the whole thing out. Some of the options that are we can exercise when you're stuck with a lot of infestation after you've cleaned it so many times, you're still seeing some infestation, some bugs. All right, there is an opportunity to make puree. If you pureed vegetables. Okay, so pureeing the vegetables and breaking them down, to the point where they don't even exist anymore. And I'm talking about like a ninja level puree. I'm talking about, Ninja Blender level puree. So that basically reduces it to nothingness, pretty much. And there is some permission for us to do that. If you're finding your vegetable is broccoli, for example, is highly, highly infested. So broccoli stems, on the other hand, are great. That's great. You just take off the leaf off the stem. I know that there's like the Chinese broccoli, which is a bit longer, has a smaller floret. So the stem, you can take off some of the leaves and just wash it quickly, and then you go right ahead and use it. Okay. And it's interesting because I know broccoli, for example, is one of those vegetables from a health perspective that contains a high level of sulforaphane, which is incredibly healthy. It's anti-cancer, it's anti-this, it's anti-aging, it's packed with a lot of nutrients. So there are ways of using these vegetables, even if they are infested, but you want to go through, the cleansing process. And, I say Baruch Hashem that in a lot of Jewish communities you have there are a lot of companies like Bodek in Canada, like Pardes out of the States that they do give already washed, already checked, greenhouse grown, lower infestation risk of broccoli, of cauliflower, of spinach. Spinach is also a high level of infestation. Kale also is a big one. The curly kale, the green kale. Black kale is easier to use because it's more flat leafed and it's easier to check, easier to wash. Okay. I juice my kale. So even if it's juiced, again, I'm just extracting the juice out of it. I'm not using the actual vegetable myself. So there's permission for you to do that as well. Okay. Without having to go through the checking process.
When you're buying frozen vegetables that have a hechsher on it, like in that case, are you okay? Or do you need to be checking the frozen?
So you want to be careful. So if you're going to use it from those companies that especially when you want to pay attention to the certification on the packaging that says no checking required, already washed. So those companies like I said, like I mentioned, like Bodek and Pardes, for example, the frozen ones, they'll have that. Or I think Positive is out of the States also. They'll have that certification, and it'll include the wording no checking necessary, already washed type of thing. The ones that don't have it, they might have a kosher certification on it, and it'll say still requires checking or must be checked type of thing. Okay. Dates, for example, dried fruits also have to be checked, dates, figs also a very, very, very big issue as well. You want to be careful with those. Okay. So those are, very common. The medjool dates, I find they're easier to check than regular dates. And it's pretty obvious when you see the bugs inside a date. It really, it stands out. It stands out, at least in my experience.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, that brings us to now we're going to talk about, I guess, speaking of, green leafy vegetables and fruits and sort of, lifestyle and eating options. So we're going to talk about the Mediterranean diet versus the whole food plant-based diet. And we'll see if we can sort of, what we can extract, what good we can take from both, if not maybe only one. Okay, so really for years, the Mediterranean diet has really impressed the medical world and nutritionists and dietitians, and yes, even cardiologists and neurologists and other medical experts have really sung the praise, of a meal plan that is valid. It's been validated in a number of bodies of research. It's positive. It has had some positive influence on heart health, on cognitive function, bone strength, and overall longevity. And even Mediterranean diet has even made its way into sort of everyday conversations. For example, the U.S. News and World Report names it as the best diet 5 years in a row, for example. And when we're talking about diet, it's not necessarily a weight loss thing I'm talking about. I'm talking about sort of an eating lifestyle, a nutritional plan. Although there is some sort of also some weight. If weight is on the top of a person's mind, there are some studies that show that the Mediterranean diet can also help in that respect. So what is the Mediterranean diet and is it hard to follow? Let's dive into this. So the Mediterranean diet is basically used today to describe a healthy dietary pattern that really tends to sort of follow the traditional dietary habits of the countries that basically neighbor the Mediterranean Sea, such as Greece, southern Italy, that region. Okay, and it is widely recommended by many health professionals as a way, because the whole way of eating emphasizes the consumption of plant foods, fruit, vegetables, grains, nuts, legumes, healthy fats such as olive oil. We'll talk about olive oil as well. The general structure of the diet does include a moderate intake of poultry, of fish, dairy, and some limited intakes of red meat. Okay, and as well, good news for people who love wine. Low to moderate amounts of red wine are also permitted, in the general eating plan of the Mediterranean diet. It does grow in popularity in the Western world. And what's funny is that in parts of the world that used to follow it, there's been its adherence has been decreasing, maybe because they're taking on more of the Western diet, just like, people in Japan where they used to follow strictly the Japanese or Asian diet. Now they're following more the sad standard American diet, and you see how it's affecting their health in that sense. Okay. Okay. So now, how was it noticed? So there was an American scientist who first he noticed the positive impact of the dietary habits among people who lived in this region. Okay, and the benefits were basically related to heart health. It was recognized as part of the 7 countries study by a researcher named Ansel Keys, and he coined the term the Mediterranean diet in 1978. Okay, we'll talk more about that study in a minute. Okay, there is some controversy that's tied to the study. And we'll get into that in a bit, having to do with the carbohydrate levels and its sort of how it's being and its connection to the food pyramid at that time and that type of thing. But we'll get into it. So, how do I start the Mediterranean diet meal plan? What do we do? So, getting started in anything is the hardest part, and how you get familiarized yourself with the food. Okay, so here's how it goes. Let me see if I can go through my notes here. Okay. Olive oil at every meal. Okay, that's the first one. Okay. Why olive oil? So, all right. Olive oil in this case, it's a polyphenol, which means it's also high in nutrients or antioxidants. A extra virgin olive oil does support a healthy inflammatory response in the body. It does seem to have some effect on cholesterol levels as well. Okay, it is important to find a high quality extra virgin olive oil, and I think I mentioned it last week or the week before that there is a lot of false labeling in the market when it comes to extra virgin olive oil. So you want to do your research, try to find a good one. Okay. It is a large component of the diet again, and that is, though it might be a pro, it also is a con, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. So again, grown in Mediterranean-like climates, there's olives are all over the place, so that's why it's there. What else? Okay. Vegetables. Next thing. Good. It's the vegetarian diet is full of vegetables. It's a plant-forward meal plan. You want to eat these at every meal. So we're talking about 6 servings daily of vegetables. Fruit at every meal, 3 servings daily. Grains at every meal, 8 servings daily. Okay, so could be pasta, oats, rice, and again, we'll talk about sort of again, that ends up being possibly a con, and how we can make it a pro again. How can we modify it? We'll get into that in a minute. Okay, we want, even though grains are typically recommended at every meal, we want to keep in mind that portion size is important. Okay, especially when we're talking about weight management and body shape, body shape management. Okay, also maintaining healthy blood sugar levels. So that's where we have to be very careful. The Mediterranean diet is not considered a low carb diet by any means at all. It is not low carb. Okay, but you can still follow a Mediterranean style diet when you pay attention to the amount of grains and fruit and legumes and starchy vegetables you eat. Okay, so just to sort of review, legumes are frequent, 4 servings per week. Nuts also frequent, 4 servings per week. Fish and seafood, moderately 5 to 6 servings per week. Moderate amounts of dairy are permitted. Low fat or reduced fat options, such as feta or Greek yogurt versus a full fat yogurt. For example, eggs, about 3 servings per week. Poultry, again, about 2 to 4 servings per week. Red wine, moderately, about 1 glass daily. Again, I have my notes tell me, 1 glass daily for women, 2 glasses daily for men. Again, maybe that's just body according to body shape or body composition. Infrequently, red meat, about 1 serving a week or less, and even some possible sweets infrequently. Okay, and of course, let's not forget about the spices. Okay, Mediterranean diet includes lots of yummy spices. So paprika, saffron, za'atar, cumin, turmeric, to name just a few. Okay, so it does have a good amount of spices, which also are very important for maintaining a good inflammatory response in the body or decreasing inflammation in the body. Okay, as I mentioned before, what's sort of not allowed or what's infrequent? Red meat, processed red meat is very infrequent. Processed foods that are sugar sweetened, also very infrequent. A lot of Mediterranean desserts use honey, for example, rather than refined sugar. Refined grains, we'll talk about that. Okay, so what are the top 3 health benefits that come with the Mediterranean diet? Okay, so there is a link to how help. It can help maintain already healthy lipid lipid levels, triglyceride levels in the blood. Already healthy blood pressure it helps to maintain, keeps inflammation at a low, and possibly helps to maintain normal weight depending on what you're having or consuming in the Mediterranean diet. Okay, it seems to keep cells healthy. Again, the high amounts of vegetables and fruits, possibly the extra virgin olive oil as well, seems to inhibit oxidative stress. So better inflammatory response or no inflammatory response, better DNA cell health as well. Okay, good for metabolic health. The Mediterranean diet is also seems to be good for metabolic health because, again, a lot of antioxidants. So there's some sort of maintaining healthy insulin level sensitivities and function of the pancreas. Okay, so that's basically in a nutshell the Mediterranean diet. Sounds good. Sounds pretty good. Okay. Now let's talk about how does that sort of if we put that up against a plant-based diet or a whole foods plant-based diet, the WFPB as it's called, how does that stack up to it? So it's true that a lot of studies have shown the Mediterranean diet does sort of, score high. People who adhere to it seem to have a significant reduction in the risk of death, heart disease, cancer, and brain disease. But the problem with a lot of these population studies is that the people who eat healthier may also live healthier. Okay. So the question is, how do we know it's their diet? Okay. The American Heart Association, states, and I quote here, before advising people to follow a Mediterranean diet, we need more studies to find out whether the diet itself or other lifestyle factors account for the lower deaths from heart disease. So how do you do that? Okay, so there's ways you can control for obvious things like smoking and exercise, which many of the studies did. But ideally, you want to do what's called an interventional study, which is the gold standard of nutritional science. So what do you mean? That means you take people, you change their diet while trying to keep everything else the same, and you see what happens. Okay, and that's what happened about 20 years ago. There was a diet called the Lion Diet Heart Study. They took 600 people, okay, who had just had their first heart attack. They were randomized into two groups. The control group got no dietary advice whatsoever, apart from whatever the doctors were telling them. And the experimental group was told to eat more of a Mediterranean type diet, supplemented with, a canola oil based spread to give them the plant-based omega-3 fatty acids that they'd normally be getting from eating, walnuts and things like that if they actually lived on a Greek island, in the 1950s. Okay, so what happened with that study? The Mediterranean diet group did end up taking some of the dietary advice. Okay, they ate more bread, more fruit, less deli meat, less meat in general, less butter and cream. But other than that, there were no significant changes in diet that were reported in terms of wine, olive oil, and consumption of fish. Okay, so overall, there was less saturated fat and less cholesterol in the diet itself. There was more plant-based omega-3 fatty acids, which are pretty good, but not huge dietary changes. Okay, but at the end of about 4 years, in the control group, 44 people had a second heart attack, either fatal or non-fatal. But only 14 suffered another attack in the group that changed their diet. So they went from having a 4% chance of having a heart attack every year down to like a 1% chance of having a heart attack with their Mediterranean diet. Okay, so, less death and disease, that's good. But the Mediterranean diet, it seems, continued to feed their heart, so much so that 14 of the people in that diet suffered new heart attacks while they were on the diet. Okay, so it seems that the disease progressed a lot less than the regular diet, about 4 times less, but there still was some heart disease there. So the question is, what if there was a diet that could stop or reverse the disease? Now, again, I seem to sort of focus a lot on heart health. And some people might come to me and say, oh, well, we're interested in more of all-cause mortality, different causes of death, so to speak. And I sort of come back with the answer that, seeing as heart disease is one of the top killers, unfortunately, in our society, that's the one I seem to focus on the most. So at the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, he published a case of about 200 patients that had cardiovascular disease, and he switched them to a diet that was composed completely of whole plant foods, okay? Of the 200, 177 stuck to the diet, 21 fell off the wagon, okay? Setting up a kind of natural sort of experiment. So what happened to the 21? Well, this was such a sick group of patients that more than half of them suffered from a fatal heart attack or needed, angioplasty or a heart transplant. All right. In the same time period of about 4 years, the 177 who stuck to the plant-based diet only had a major event as a result of worsening disease. Not half, but less than 1%. Okay. So Dean Ornish, who also was very, very big proponent of plant-based diet, he writes here, a Mediterranean diet is better than what most people are consuming, even better, maybe a diet based on whole foods and plants. So yes, Mediterranean diet is great, but if you can switch to, a situation where you're on whole foods and plant-based completely, you'll have an even better chance of sort of beating the odds and putting your body at in the best state that it can be. Okay, so the question is, can we improve the Mediterranean diet? And I think we can. Okay, first we have to do is we have to sort of focus on and sort of isolate. There are 4 aspects that might be problematic when it comes to the Mediterranean diet. Okay, the first one basically is the grains. So when people think of a Mediterranean diet today, they're thinking about basically, having a lot of baguettes and a lot of breads and a lot of white pasta, and really, if you think about it, the traditional Mediterranean diet really had unprocessed grains, whole grains, okay, farro and oats and whole wheat and things like that. So that basically had a greater effect. Whole grains have a much greater effect. They are associated with a lower risk of diabetes, a lower risk of heart disease, lower risk of cancer. Refined grains actually increase the risk. Refined flours, the white flour, increase the risk of diabetes, of obesity, of heart disease, and other chronic diseases. Okay, so that's one thing. If we could improve the Mediterranean diet, I'd say that's one for sure. So make sure if you're going to do a Mediterranean diet, you're doing whole grains only. So you don't want to be on any white flour whatsoever. You don't want to be on any, if you're going to have rice, having a whole grain rice, wild rice, brown rice type of thing. Whole wheat couscous as opposed to regular couscous, things like that. Oats. Okay, so that's one. Second problem that comes is the alcohol. Alcohol may also be a problem. Okay, when you think about it, the alcohol, even with the alcohol, red wine or alcohol in general, everything sort of dropped with the fruits, veggies, nuts, seeds, and beans, and lower saturated fats. There was a lower risk of cancer altogether. But while they were still consuming red wine, the risk of breast cancer was still present even in moderate amounts of consumption of red wine. So that's one thing. If you could exclude or de-alcoholize wine, have just the benefit of the red grape, like we talked about, I think two classes ago or last class, then you're doing good. Again, limiting the amount of red wine, the alcohol part of the wine intake. Okay. Next, now the extra virgin oil. Yes, does have an antioxidant aspect to it. Nonetheless, it seems to also impair arterial function. Okay, oil does that in general. The high fats do that in general. So basically, if you're dipping that bread in the olive oil all the time, which is like the classic symbol of a Mediterranean diet, having the olive oil on the table, dipping the bread inside there, okay, you want to sort of remove the oil and keep it at lower amounts than possible if you can. You can supplement, essential fatty acids. We talked about fish oils. There are also algae-based oils, algae-based essential fatty acids as well that are healthier alternative, and you won't have the oil as part of that problem. And the fourth aspect that might be problematic in the Mediterranean diet basically is the sodium or the salt intake. Okay. Despite the fact that there is an association between salt intake and high blood pressure, heart disease, strokes, things like that. Okay. So we want to sort of be careful of the amount of salt that we're putting into the food. That's where, again, if we're going to modify the Mediterranean diet, I would highly recommend throwing in a lot more spices and sort of pulling back on the salt a little bit, and let the other spices sort of come out and have their aromatic, flavors more so than the salt. Okay. So that's the fourth idea. Okay. So we can learn a lot from the traditional Mediterranean diet. Okay. And the big takeaway with Mediterranean diet is basically the abundance of plant foods. Okay. The abundance of fruits and vegetables, really, really important. The fiber that comes with that. Okay. The greens, the whole grains, that's really, really important. So if you're focusing on the good aspects of it and limit the other aspects that may still be detrimental to health, whether it's the animal-based aspect, whether it's the high fat content aspect, the salt, possible too much alcohol intake aspect, then I think you would also improve, that if you're going to follow that sort of that method of eating as well. Any questions? Any thoughts, guys?
With the red wine, so it's resveratrol, right? That's supposed to be,
Resveratrol.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
supposed to be good. So if you're de-alcoholizing the red wine, like there's still usually like a lot of sugar and whatnot in that. Are you better off not just to take like a resveratrol supplement or something? Or
It's a good question. So I mean, if you're going to pay attention, if there's a sort of a risk of diabetes, then you want to be more, or pre-diabetes or metabolic syndrome, you want to be careful with that. 100%. You're better off doing the supplement. But if you still want to have sort of the social aspect of drinking some sort of a red wine and making sure it's a pure red wine, not that hasn't been sort of sweetened or anything like that, then I would say you'll still get the benefit, of the boost in endothelial function, the which is basically the ability of the arteries to relax. Okay, increasing your blood flow, you'll still get that as well. Okay, so yeah, I wouldn't cut it out right unless there are the risk factors that are already present. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I just had a question.
Thanks, Dan.
Hi. I read that using the whole grain, like using brown rice, has got more lectins, and it's more irritating to the gastrointestinal system than using white rice. And and this is coming from like Dr. Gundry's books, and he said that he recommended rather not using the whole grain breads and the rice and that kind of thing because of the lectins is so irritating to the gastrointestinal tract and cause a lot of issues. So it's a bit confusing to understand.
Yeah. So I would say two things. One, I mean, it brings to mind. There's a study, I think, or like in the 50s, called the Kempner Rice study, I think what it is, where they just basically fed people, like patients in a ward, like white rice, and they all lost weight type of thing. So like the white rice, and they had no no issues type of thing with blood sugar or things like that. So there is something to be said about white rice, which is a positive thing, I would say. At the same time, again, we have to sort of again, it's a case by case basis, I would say, and it's very individualistic in the sense that, okay, do I have pre-existing gastrointestinal issues? Do I react to lectins? Do the lectins break down when I'm cooking the food as well? There's also an aspect of that, right? So the lectins do break down on a certain level when the food is being cooked. So again, if someone's coming to me with a pre-existing gastrointestinal issue, I may do just white rice for a while, and in fact that is what I do with patients that have IBS or things like that. So and they'll go on white rice, which is very 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 clean, very lesser side effects. They may not get the benefit of the higher fiber content that they would get in brown rice, but nonetheless, it's there. And you see cultures, Asian cultures, for example, very much so depend on white rice more so than any other sort of whole grain rice. I can't hear you. Sorry, Stan.
Which is the rice you recommend? Would it be like a brown rice or a basmati rice or a wild blended rice?
I like the wild rices. Wild rice basically is very much not a rice. Yeah, exactly. It's a comp. So the wild rice is that's a great. I like that. The wild rice is great at it's more of a grass actually than it is a rice, from what I understand, and that's a great way to go. When it comes to Pesach, and I eat rice on Pesach, I very proudly say that. It's more of a chore to check it because it's hard to tell between the wild rices and grains of wheat. But nonetheless, yeah, I would do wild rice first. Then I would do like a basmati brown rice, a jasmine brown rice, things like that, and yes, and even with that, I do a lot of sushi rice at home as well, and we season it with rice vinegar and with a bit of cane sugar and a little bit of pink Himalayan salt as well, when we serve it.
And how important is it for the rice to be organic?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't think that, I don't necessarily think that ends up being that important from what I mean. If, rice is grown in regions of the world where I suspect, from what I've read, there are lower rates of pesticide use, or, they've been grown traditionally for centuries, in rice paddies and things like that. So maybe less so. I mean, have you come across literature that says that there's a lot of high insecticide or pesticide use?
No, I don't know. I mean, I just know you can buy organic and non-organic, and I mean, I basically follow if I'm going to buy organic, it's usually if I'm going to buy fruits that have got thin skins like grapes or strawberries or things like that. I buy organic, and other fruits that like lemons or avocados, whatever. There's not that in critical to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure where rice fits into that.
Yeah. When it comes to the rice, I usually stay away from rice that's been handled in the Western world. I'll buy the bags of rice, big bags. I go to the international store or whatnot, or international section of the grocery store. I'll buy big bags of rice that come straight from Thailand or from India or from Iran, type of thing. And yeah, it seems to be much better than the rice that's handled. Rice that gets handled in the Western, in North America, gets sprayed with starch, gets sprayed with also some vitamins. It's enriched, and there are issues with that when it comes to Pesach, for example. So I tend to sort of lean more towards the sort of the natural stuff that comes out from straight from other countries.
And just one other thing, I don't want to monopolize the questions here, but when it comes to making our own challah on a Friday night, what kind of flour do you recommend to be the best kind of flour we should use?
That's a great question. So spelt is good. There's a whole wheat or rye spelt I would recommend. We did a combination here once with oat flour and spelt flour. If I want to have a more, if my family, I'll be honest, my family loves regular challah also. So we try to mix it up. We'll throw in like a bit of organic, unbleached white flour together with whole grain flour to give it more of a body, more of a fluffiness type of thing, and less density. So we do that here as well. Yeah.
Hi.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hi, Ron.
Hi there. Sorry, I've been listening the whole time with Esther Isa here, but we couldn't keep our camera on, so I just want you to know that we were here. I have a question though, question observation, and it has to do with any studies you're aware of about the attitudes, especially the emotional tuning that people have when they eat. And part of the background for that is that people who are guilty about what they eat, people who struggle with their choices, sometimes sit down and eat something saying, I shouldn't be eating this, or I'm eating too much, or something like that. And I just have a hunch that really also plays a big role in how the body metabolizes the food. But I'm just curious about your thoughts about that, or maybe you know some studies even.
No, there's no doubt. I'm sure you'll agree that the most ideal way for us to eat our food is when the body's in a parasympathetic mode, as opposed to a sympathetic mode, neurologically speaking. So the sympathetic mode is we're sort of high on adrenaline, we're in a rush, we're not meant to be digesting food at that state. We have to bring our bodies into a sense of calm and relaxation. And it's interesting that the Ben Ish Chai, for example, Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, one of the great halachic authorities from the previous generation, he writes a whole sort of order of before you eat, you've got to sit down. You should contemplate what you're going to do before you even say the hamotzi, the bracha on the bread. You might want to do like a confession to Hashem. Pour out your heart, get yourself ready for this event of and he prescribes like this whole like a list of certain orders of Mishnah to learn, certain lines of the Zohar to recite, to put you in sort of this meditative state, so to speak, that gets you and prepares you prepares your body to go into a parasympathetic state. I've Baruch Hashem, tried to do it a couple of times, and it actually does help. Alternately, I'll just sit for about 5 to 11 minutes, and I'll just breathe really deeply to get my body just relaxed. I think the 11-minute breathing scenario helps to put the body sort of in that relaxed state and allows you to sort of now enjoy the food. And it seems to taste better. It seems to taste better even when you're in that sense of being. And maybe it has something, it just brings to mind, the whole order we do on a Friday night of the Shalom Aleichem and Eshet Chayil and all the singing we do in preparation for the Kiddush. I have the sense that puts us in that state of, relaxation and readiness to partake, of the spiritual meal that we're about to have on a physical plane. So no doubt about it that, when we consume our foods in different states of emotion, it has a very direct effect on our digestion. No doubt.
It's very hard to study that and validate that people are actually creating those states in research.
Yeah, that would be fascinating to do. I would love to do some more research on that to find if there is something like that. That'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question somewhat related but unrelated to the class. So you're going to be here this weekend, this Shabbat, but then you're coming back again in a few more weeks and a little bit longer visit. And if I remember correctly, sorry, my dog is trying to get into the class. If I remember correctly, you actually really enjoy cooking as well. And I think it'd be really fun if you were game, if we were to do some kind of like cooking with the rabbi class or like session with some like amazing vegan options. Cause there's so many people, especially in our Sephardic community, that are like vegan, like, why are you doing this to me kind of thing. And I know that we can have like really incredible, unbelievable, like mind-blowing food that is vegan. So
Yeah, I would love that. I'm totally game for that. Totally.
okay, perfect.
Yeah,
We're
sign
on
me
it.
up.
We'll talk about it this week. Ron's like us right up your alley too, because him and Esparisa are like amazing cooks. So yeah. Okay, cool. We'll work on that.
Okay, awesome. Oh, and I should add, probably there. I'm guessing because I'll be returning, flying back in. I think on midnight on Sunday. I don't know that I'll have time to prepare a good class for the Monday evening. So I think we'll we'll reschedule next class for the following Monday after the. That's okay with you guys?
Perfect.
Okay, awesome.
We'll harass you this Shabbat with all our
Okay,
questions.
perfect.
Amazing.
I just had a question about I read that it's supposed to be very important to allow for at least 4 hours of digestion before you go to sleep, not to eat and then lie down straight afterwards, because I read it's something called the glymphatic system, which
Yes.
There's like a rinsing of the brain cells, and if the blood flow is going to the stomach, the brain, that there's not enough blood flow going to the brain, and you don't get this washing of the cells, you can develop buildup of proteins, and there's conditions like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all these kind of things that can happen related to that kind of amyloid building up in the brain. So that being an Orthodox, well, trying to be an observant Jew and trying to keep all the chagim and having all these late meals, how do we manage to do that on these nights, or do we just kind of skip the health thing on those nights and just try to do it when it's not a chag?
So who says that you have to gorge yourself on the night meals? Nobody says that. Nowhere does it say in halacha we have to gorge ourselves on the meals we have in the evening. I tend to eat much, even on Friday nights. Personally, I tend to eat much lighter than I would on a Shabbat lunch, so to speak, knowing that my body's about to go rest, and so I don't like to go to sleep, feeling very, very too satiated, so to speak. Besides the it's a explicit Rambam, Maimonides, that states that so we should sort of eat our meal with the intention that we're going to sort of leave ourselves 20% empty, so to speak, or only 80% full, so to speak. So we don't want to sit and engorge ourselves, and that's one thing you have to go in with that idea. There's no reason to have that, or have a lighter meal in general on for the night meals, so to speak. certainly on Friday on a winter night, well, like we have now, you're eating your meal around like what 5:30. 6 o'clock, and then you'll get it. You'll go. You'll learn. You'll take a walk. You'll go to the Friday night learning program that Bet Midrash will have one day, Be'ezrat Hashem. From 8:45 to 9:45, and then you'll type of thing. The only problem is when they do it here, they add the kugel at the end. They add a chulent at the end on a Friday night, so that gets to be more of a again, but that's more for the teenagers. But nonetheless, you can sort of tailor it properly and measure that you can still enjoy and partake of proper Shabbat meal or Yom Tov meal, but it doesn't have to be over the top. It doesn't have to be to what's called achila gasa or too much. That makes sense, Stan?
Yeah, it makes sense. No, but I was getting sort of that tells me I was getting more to the point of like when you have these Yom Tov meals, like for example when you sometimes on on Pesach or like the Seder or it could be most of the Chagim, like especially in Vancouver, by the time we we make Kiddush after the meal, whatever, it could be like 8:30, 9 o'clock. So you end up eating later, so that the amount of hours that you have to digest your food before going to sleep. And the point is that we can't eat earlier because you have to wait for the shkia and the getting dark and the
Right.
because we live in this part of the world. So maybe that's why maybe we're supposed to be in Eretz Israel where you wouldn't have that issue so much because it's but the fact is that if you start having a meal at 9 o'clock or at 9:30 or whatever it is, you have to extend the time you go to sleep. Was like or you just because you need to have a certain number of hours. I mean, what is your opinion on like the amount of time required for digestion to take place after a meal before you go to sleep?
The Rambam talks about the idea of after having a meal, it's important to, for example, take a certain number of steps. I think he talks about like 200 steps or something like that. There's some sort of number he brings down. I know we're big on sort of did I do my 10,000 steps today? So back in in the 1200s, the Rambam already had this idea of taking steps or taking a walk or whatnot after having a meal to sort of aid in digestion. So if you're doing things or an activity that'll help you to sort of augment the digestive factor that's happening and not just sort of sitting down and plopping on your couch after your meal, I think that also may probably have some an added sort of adjunctive feature of helping us to digest before we go to sleep. And you're right, it comes for Pesach, for example, we want to wait until it's nighttime for the Seder, for example. Shavuot, we want to wait till we're complete 49 days when we have our Shavuot meal, so it's later at night. You're right, 100%. In the case of Shavuot, we're up all night anyway, so that's one idea. In the case of Pesach, you're doing the Seder. I haven't gone to bed before 2 o'clock in the morning when I've done my Seder. So and we finished eating it way before that. So there are times where again being cognizant of that and trying to sort of be aware of the factors and how your body reacts to sleep and how it doesn't react and also we go through sort of periods in our Jewish cycle where we eat quite a bit, and then we go through periods where there is less eating, so to speak. We had the high holidays, we had Sukkot, we had Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchat Torah, and everything, and now we're sort of in this period where we don't necessarily have to eat a lot. So the body has a great way, or we can sort of use the mechanisms, whether it's all the hacks of intermittent fasting and things like that we can do during the week to help our body readjust better, and it doesn't have to be, so that when we have those times, they're few and far between and not as frequent, and our body's better able to sort of, adapt to that. That might also be another idea. Can't hear you. Sorry.
That makes sense. Thank you. Yeah,
you're welcome. Okay, everyone.
Yeah, well, thank you. So I guess it's after 8 o'clock. We look forward to seeing you later this week, Rabbi. I wish you a safe trip.
Amen. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you,
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Good
night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.